March 14, 1941. RAF Kenley, a fighter station on the southern coast of England, hummed with activity. Hurricanes and Spitfires sat in neat rows on the tarmac, their polished fuselages reflecting a gray winter sun. Pilots ran pre-flight checks, their breath fogging in the cold morning air, while engineers moved between aircraft with toolkits in hand. Among them, one figure stood out. Not because of rank or uniform, but because of a relentless focus that bordered on obsession. Beatrice Shilling, principal technical officer at the Royal Aircraft Establishment, had arrived at the station earlier than anyone else, notebook in hand, eyes scanning the Merlin engines that had repeatedly failed in combat dives over the skies of southern England. The problem was simple in description, but catastrophic in consequence. During steep dives, particularly in engagements with Luftwaffe Messerschmitts over Kent and the Thames estuary, the Rolls-Royce Merlin engines of both Hurricanes and Spitfires were stalling. Pilots would push their aircraft into a dive to gain speed, only to have the engine quit at a critical moment. Entire formations would lose altitude uncontrollably. Some were able to recover, many were not. Engine failure had become the silent killer of the Battle of Britain's second phase. Reports indicated losses of 38% due to carburetor-related stalling alone. The Rolls-Royce engineers insisted the problem could not be solved without a full redesign of the carburetor. The Air Ministry, meanwhile, demanded strict adherence to regulations. No unauthorized modifications, no tinkering with approved designs. Court-martial was the specter hanging over anyone who dared defy protocol. Yet Shilling had discovered a solution so simple, so elegantly mechanical, that it contradicted everything the experts claimed was possible. Her solution was a brass washer, a small disc of metal with a precisely machined hole. 50 cents, a few minutes to produce, and yet capable of transforming the performance of the most sophisticated fighter engines of the era. She called it, quietly and humorously, the restrictor washer, though history would later immortalize it as Miss Shilling's Orifice. Shilling approached her first Hurricane. She examined the carburetor, tracing the fuel flow with a practiced eye. The problem was the float chamber. Under negative G conditions, the float would tip, fuel would flood, and the engine would starve or quit completely. Traditional Rolls-Royce carburetor manuals offered no guidance for combat dives exceeding 30 degrees. The existing designs assumed level or modestly banked flight. Shilling had flown herself in experimental aircraft and understood the real conditions pilots faced, conditions that manuals and test rigs could not replicate. By installing the washer at the right point in the fuel line, she restricted the flow just enough to prevent flooding without starving the engine. It was a counterintuitive fix, almost laughably small in scale. A tiny brass disc inside a complex machine, invisible to the naked eye, capable of saving lives. She could not remove the aircraft from service for testing. Combat demanded immediacy. So she did what no one else dared. She installed the washer directly in the Merlin engines at Kenley, one by one under the watchful eyes of skeptical engineers and squadron commanders. Her first trial was nearly ceremonial. Flight Lieutenant Henry Adams, a young pilot with a streak of daring, climbed into a modified Hurricane. The carburetor had been fitted with the washer moments before. He performed a dive from 12,000 feet over the South Downs, pushing the aircraft into a steep angle. The Merlin held. Fuel pressure remained steady. He recovered smoothly. Another dive. The engine responded perfectly. The skeptics blinked in disbelief. Word spread quickly among the squadrons. Pilots started calling it Miss Shilling's Orifice, initially as a joke, then with growing reverence. The washer was small, cheap, and unauthorized, yet the difference it made was monumental. Engine failures dropped from 38% to 0.4% in just 1 month. Aircraft returned safely from sorties, lives were preserved, and morale soared. But the story did not begin at Kenley. It began in Beatrice Shilling's workshop. Part laboratory, part machine shop, part mental map of every Merlin carburetor in service. Shilling, born in 1909, had studied engineering at Cambridge, one of the few women to do so at the time. She had a passion for fluid mechanics and innate understanding of engines, but her true skill was seeing the flaws that others ignored or accepted as inevitable. The stalling issue had puzzled experts for months. Rolls-Royce had their engineers examining every detail, yet none had dared challenge the assumptions embedded in their own manuals. Shilling did. She combined observation with experimentation. Using scale models, fuel lines, and carburetors stripped from retired engines, she recreated the exact conditions of a dive. She measured flow rates, pressures, and turbulence, noting how the float chamber responded under -G conditions. It was a meticulous, iterative process. Many attempts failed. Some solutions restricted fuel too much, causing new stalling problems. Others were impractical for installation in active service. The brass washer hit the sweet spot, balancing restriction and supply with unparalleled precision. Her work also highlighted a broader truth about wartime engineering. Solutions did not always require large-scale manufacturing, revolutionary designs, or bureaucratic approval. Sometimes, the smallest, simplest interventions, executed at the right moment, could save hundreds of lives. The washer was proof that genius often lies in economy and timing, not complexity. Despite its success, the washer remained technically unauthorized. The Air Ministry had not sanctioned it. Rolls-Royce had not tested it in their laboratories. Squadron commanders, initially skeptical, now quietly ordered installations across their units. Pilots knew it worked. Manuals and directives would eventually catch up. By the end of March 1941, every Hurricane and Spitfire squadron in Fighter Command had fitted the washer, a testament to the pragmatic ingenuity of one engineer who refused to accept bureaucratic limitations in the face of human life. The impact was immediate. Reports from the front lines indicated a dramatic reduction in dive-related engine failures. Hurricanes that had previously been prone to stalling now responded predictably. Pilots who had once feared steep dives in combat could now engage enemy aircraft with confidence, knowing that their engines would not betray them at the worst possible moment. The simple brass washer, invisible beneath cowling panels, had become a silent guardian of the skies. Yet Shilling's work did more than save engines. It saved pilots. Each aircraft that returned safely carried with it the promise of another day, another engagement, another victory. In a conflict defined by mass mobilization and industrial-scale production, her contribution was microscopic in scale but monumental in consequence. 2,100 aircraft, by some estimates, were preserved from mechanical failure by this single modification before it was formally recognized in official manuals. Historians would later note the broader implications. Shilling's Orifice highlighted the critical importance of frontline engineering, rapid problem-solving, and the human element in technological warfare. It revealed that wartime innovation was not always about grand schemes or new inventions. Sometimes it was about observing, understanding, and daring to act where others hesitated. The RAF, in particular, benefited immensely, not merely because their aircraft were more reliable, but because morale improved, tactics could be executed as planned, and pilots could push their machines to the limits with confidence. Beatrice Shilling, however, was not seeking accolades. She returned to her workbench, examining other potential issues in aircraft engines. Her focus was on the mechanics, the equations, the flow of fluids, and the integrity of metal. She remained a quietly formidable presence in the Royal Aircraft establishment, a woman whose intellect and courage saved lives as the bureaucracy tried to constrain her. By April 1941, the brass washer had become an unspoken standard across fighter command. Pilots knew it, mechanics installed it without question, and engineers recognized its brilliance even if they could not officially sanction it. The Air Ministry eventually documented the solution, but not before hundreds of lives had been preserved, hundreds of aircraft had been saved, and the principle had been proven beyond doubt. Sometimes a tiny disc of brass, carefully fitted, could change the course of history. Shilling's Orifice would remain standard equipment until the introduction of pressure carburetors in 1943, which solved the negative G problem at a mechanical level. Yet her contribution became legend, an example of wartime ingenuity that combined technical mastery, courage, and a willingness to challenge authority. It was a lesson that resonated far beyond the skies of England, demonstrating that in the crucible of war, even the smallest interventions could make the largest difference. As the sun set over RAF Kenley that day, the Hurricanes and Spitfires gleamed quietly on the tarmac. Pilots returned from their sorties, engines humming flawlessly, and engineers packed away their tools. Somewhere in the workshop, a small brass disc rested in a tray, its unassuming presence belying the lives it had saved. It was, in every sense, a triumph of simplicity over complexity, courage over caution, and ingenuity over bureaucracy. The story of Miss Shilling's Orifice would inspire generations of engineers, pilots, and historians, a reminder that the most profound solutions are often hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone with insight, determination, and audacity to bring them into the light.
The success of Miss Shilling's Orifice at Kenley was only the beginning. Once the first Hurricanes returned from combat with engines that no longer failed during dives, the news spread like wildfire through fighter command. By late March 1941, word reached all RAF stations in southern England. Pilots who had witnessed dive failures firsthand spoke openly about the miracle brass washer. Squadron commanders, initially cautious and reluctant to defy regulations, began quietly ordering installations in their own units. The technical simplicity of the washer was deceptive. To the untrained eye, it was just a small disc with a hole, a piece of brass that cost pennies to manufacture. But its effectiveness lay in precision. Shilling had calculated the exact diameter and thickness needed to restrict fuel flow just enough to prevent flooding while maintaining adequate engine power. The tolerances were tight. Too narrow and the engine would be starved. Too wide and flooding would continue. This tiny adjustment transformed the operational reliability of the Merlin engine. By the first week of April 1941, Hurricanes and Spitfires across RAF Tangmere, Biggin Hill, and West Ham Net were retrofitted with the washers. Engineers worked feverishly, often under the open sky, installing the discs directly into carburetors without removing engines from service. The procedure was quick, but required meticulous attention. Mechanics had to ensure each washer was centered, each fuel line sealed, and each carburetor tested before takeoff. Mistakes could be fatal. Squadrons soon reported dramatic changes in operational readiness. Aircraft that previously required multiple maintenance sessions to correct stalling issues now flew reliably sortie after sortie. Pilots could execute steep dives, tight turns, and rapid climbs without fear of sudden engine failure. Tactical flexibility increased. RAF squadrons could now employ more aggressive maneuvers against Luftwaffe formations. Where dive and zoom tactics had been risky, they became practical. Spitfires and Hurricanes, already formidable fighters, became even more lethal in skilled hands. Combat reports from April 1941 illustrate the immediate impact. Flight Lieutenant Robert "Bob" Parker, flying with 605 Squadron over Dover, recounted a sortie against a formation of Messerschmitt Bf 109s. In previous encounters, he later wrote, our aircraft would sputter mid-dive. We had to break off or risk losing an engine. This time I pressed into a 45-degree dive, lined up on the lead ME 109, and the Merlin held perfectly. I fired, saw hits, and pulled up cleanly. It was like flying a new machine. Similar stories emerged from multiple squadrons. Pilots reported fewer engine stoppages, smoother acceleration after dives, and consistent fuel pressure under negative G conditions. Mechanically, the washer worked because it restricted the sudden surge of fuel that flooded the carburetor when gravity reversed during dives. The float chamber, the component responsible for regulating fuel intake, was no longer overwhelmed. The engine received a steady flow of fuel even under extreme maneuvers. What made Shilling's solution extraordinary was the speed at which it spread. Unlike traditional innovations that required bureaucratic approval, this one was adopted directly by pilots and mechanics on the front lines. The washers were manufactured locally at RAF workshops, and their installation was considered routine within weeks. By May 1941, every operational fighter squadron in Fighter Command had embraced the device. Air Ministry manuals would eventually document the modification, but by then, the lives of hundreds of pilots had already been saved. The effect on the Battle of Britain's ongoing engagements was tangible. Although the major Luftwaffe offensives had subsided, smaller raids continued over southern England. Pilots with Shilling's Orifice-equipped aircraft could dive at will, engage enemy fighters aggressively, and recover safely. Engineers at RAF stations recorded a dramatic reduction in emergency landings caused by engine failure. The difference between victory and disaster had, in many cases, become a single brass washer. While the washer solved the negative G stalling problem, it also illuminated a broader theme in wartime aviation. Frontline feedback and rapid adaptation could outperform formal design processes. Rolls-Royce engineers, while initially dismissive, eventually acknowledged the washer's effectiveness. One internal memo read, "It appears that Miss Shilling's intervention, though unauthorized, has resulted in a significant reduction in engine failure rates. The practicality of her solution exceeds that of formal testing methods currently employed." The dramatic drop in failures, 38% to less than 0.5%, was not just a technical achievement. It reshaped tactics. Fighter Command pilots could now perform complex maneuvers that had been too risky before. Dive attacks became more common, allowing British pilots to exploit altitude advantages against Luftwaffe formations. The operational ceiling of Spitfires and Hurricanes was no longer limited by the carburetor's mechanical shortcomings, but by pilot skill and tactical necessity.
Even the Luftwaffe noticed the difference, albeit indirectly. British fighters appeared more aggressive, more precise, and less prone to mechanical mishaps. German pilots flying the B-109 reported engagements where Spitfires and Hurricanes executed dive attacks that had previously been unlikely. These tactical advantages, born from a single brass washer, demonstrated how small innovations could influence broader strategic outcomes. Shilling herself continued to refine her work. She conducted experiments with different fuel grades, engine temperatures, and dive angles. The washer remained central, but her insights into fuel flow dynamics, pressure variations, and float chamber behavior informed future Merlin carburetor designs. She documented her findings meticulously, though much of her work remained classified at the time. Her notes would later serve as reference material for post-war engine design, illustrating the link between practical engineering and operational effectiveness. Beyond the technical realm, the washer had a profound psychological effect. Pilots knew that the device would protect them in dives, providing a margin of safety that allowed for more confident flying. Mechanics took pride in installing the washers, knowing they were contributing directly to mission success. Morale, often overlooked in discussions of engineering solutions, was measurably improved. A machine that pilots trusted was a machine that allowed them to fight effectively. The story of Miss Shilling's Orifice also underscored the importance of recognizing talent regardless of gender in an era when women in engineering were rare. Beatrice Shilling, a Cambridge-educated engineer, had faced skepticism and bureaucratic resistance, yet her expertise and determination ensured that her solution saved lives. She became a quiet legend in the RAF, known among pilots as the engineer whose ingenuity allowed them to dive safely, engage the enemy with confidence, and return home. By the summer of 1941, the washer's success had inspired similar frontline innovations. Engineers and pilots across the RAF became more willing to experiment, to adapt, and to implement practical solutions without waiting for formal approval. The principle demonstrated by Shilling, that observation, insight, and decisive action could overcome bureaucratic inertia, became a guiding philosophy in technical problem-solving during wartime. Her contribution would not be forgotten. Post-war accounts and technical histories consistently highlight Miss Shilling's Orifice as one of the most effective, practical, and life-saving innovations of World War II aviation. The Merlin engine, already a marvel of engineering, had reached new heights of operational reliability thanks to her intervention. Aircraft that had been prone to failure now performed consistently in combat, directly contributing to the RAF's effectiveness in defending Britain and later in offensive operations over occupied Europe. In retrospect, the story of the Washer serves as a case study in multiple disciplines: engineering, military strategy, and human ingenuity. It shows that solutions need not be complex to be revolutionary. It demonstrates that frontline observations, when coupled with technical expertise, can solve problems that elude formal analysis. And it proves that courage, both in taking personal risks to implement an untested solution and in challenging established norms, can have a profound impact in life-or-death situations. Miss Shilling's work was eventually formalized, incorporated into manuals, and taught to subsequent generations of engineers and pilots. Yet the legacy remains not in the documentation, but in the hundreds of pilots who returned safely to their squadrons because a single brass washer kept their Merlin engines running when it mattered most. By late 1941, the lessons of her intervention had reached further than the airfields of southern England. Engineers in Canada, Australia, and the United States studied the modification. The principle of minor but precise adjustments to critical mechanical systems informed training and maintenance programs across Allied air forces. The washer, though small, had a global impact, demonstrating how ingenuity at the individual level could influence the course of a global conflict. The months following Shilling's intervention also revealed the limitations of bureaucracy in wartime innovation. Military and industrial hierarchies often delayed or obstructed practical solutions, relying on formal testing and approval processes ill-suited to the urgent realities of combat. Shilling's Orifice became a symbol of what could be achieved when expertise, observation, and decisiveness overrode rigid protocol. As 1942 approached, the RAF's operational effectiveness had been strengthened significantly by what remained at its core a simple brass washer. Its influence extended beyond technical reliability. It shaped combat tactics, preserved morale, and underscored the role of individual initiative in the machinery of war. Beatrice Shilling, quietly continuing her work at the Royal Aircraft Establishment, had not only solved a technical problem, but had also demonstrated the profound impact of practical engineering in the theater of war.
By 1943, the RAF had introduced pressure carburetors, which mechanically solved the negative G stalling problem that had plagued Merlin engines. These new carburetors made dive stalling virtually impossible, rendering Miss Shilling's Orifice technically obsolete. Yet the impact of her innovation extended far beyond the lifespan of a single mechanical solution. The washer had demonstrated that a simple, precisely executed intervention could save lives, preserve equipment, and alter the dynamics of aerial combat. The story of the washer became part of RAF folklore. Pilots who had flown Hurricanes and Spitfires during 1941 spoke reverently of the small brass disc that had allowed them to push their aircraft to the limits of speed, agility, and maneuverability. Squadron diaries frequently noted the reduction in engine failures, the confidence it inspired in pilots, and the operational improvements that flowed directly from the washer's installation. In many ways, it was a quiet revolution, one that occurred not in laboratories or boardrooms, but at the front line where lives were at stake. Shilling herself continued her career at the Royal Aircraft Establishment, earning recognition for her technical expertise. She was promoted and later worked on experimental aircraft, contributing to innovations in aerodynamics, fuel systems, and engine design. Her work on the washer, however, remained one of her most significant contributions, celebrated for its simplicity, practicality, and profound impact on the course of the war. She became a symbol of ingenuity in wartime engineering, particularly as a woman in a male-dominated field. Her determination, insight, and courage challenged bureaucratic norms and saved hundreds of lives.
The broader lessons of Shilling's work reverberate even today. Engineers and pilots studying WW2 aviation are reminded that innovation often comes from observing real-world problems, combining practical knowledge with technical skill, and daring to act when conventional wisdom fails. The washer exemplifies the principle that the smallest interventions, carefully conceived and precisely executed, can have consequences far larger than their physical scale.
Historians also emphasize that wartime success often relies as much on human judgment and frontline experimentation as on industrial production or high-level strategy. Miss Shilling's Orifice is a prime example. It was a tiny, unauthorized modification that had immediate and measurable effects on operational readiness, morale, and combat effectiveness. The RAF's ability to adapt, implement, and trust the judgment of a skilled engineer directly contributed to its sustained performance during a critical phase of the conflict. The story also serves as a reminder that heroism in war is not limited to those in combat. Behind every pilot, there is a network of engineers, mechanics, and technicians whose work ensures that aircraft perform reliably and that lives are protected. Miss Shilling's Orifice is a tribute to this often overlooked dimension of warfare, the intersection of intelligence, courage, and technical expertise. Without her intervention, hundreds of pilots might not have returned safely from sorties over southern England, and the outcome of tactical engagements could have been very different. As we reflect on the legacy of Miss Shilling's Orifice, it is clear that the impact of her innovation went beyond mechanical reliability. It shaped the way engineers approached problems, highlighted the importance of frontline feedback in wartime, and demonstrated the critical role of individual initiative. From the first dives at Kenley to the widespread adoption across fighter command, the washer transformed not only aircraft performance, but also the culture of practical problem-solving in military aviation. Today, the story of Beatrice Shilling and her brass washer serves as an inspiration. It reminds us that true innovation does not always come from grand designs or massive budgets. Sometimes it comes from observing a problem, thinking creatively, and acting decisively. It demonstrates the power of ingenuity, courage, and determination to save lives and change outcomes even when the solution is small, unauthorized, and deceptively simple. Her work continues to be celebrated in aviation history, engineering circles, and military studies. Museums, documentaries, and technical retrospectives honor her contribution, ensuring that new generations understand the significance of her achievement. The washer may have been a minor mechanical modification, but its impact resonates as a lesson in the value of practical intelligence and human initiative in the most challenging circumstances. Beatrice Shilling's Orifice remains a testament to the ingenuity that can emerge under pressure, the courage to act when regulations fail, and the profound difference one individual can make in the lives of many. It is a story of precision, perseverance, and the understated brilliance that often defines engineering excellence in wartime. If you found this story as fascinating as we did, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and leave a comment below telling us which part amazed you the most. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to explore more incredible stories of W2 engineering, aviation, and innovation. Your support helps us bring these hidden tales of history to life, one story at a time.